Hello and welcome to the Green Collar Careers Podcast. I'm your host, Jose Almanzar, a practicing environmental attorney and former environmental scientist. This podcast is all about exploring careers in sustainability in the environmental field, what they look like, how to get started, and how to grow into them. Each episode, I sit down with professionals who have built meaningful careers in this space to hear their stories, how they got started, the challenges they faced, and the advice I have for anyone looking to break in or level up. Whether you're a student, a career changer, or just passionate about making a difference, these conversations will have something valuable for you. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Let's dive right in. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Jose Almanzar. I'm here with my good friend and one of my favorite people, Pete Rose of Hydro-Quebec. Pete, how are you doing today?
Fabulous. Thanks, Jose. How you doing?
So Pete and I were discussing a few minutes before, and we both were in DC, overlapping a little bit at the same time. So, Pete, we need to get him jacked up because we both had some long travel the last 2 days. Pete, I have to ask you a question. I'm going to get the elephant out of the room. Were you named after the baseball player Pete Rose?
Yeah. It's a good elephant to start with. I was born in 1979, and Pete Rose had some good seasons in the 70s. I have an older brother. And so when my mom was pregnant, my dad was going to call me Wesley because he liked some actor named Wesley. And my brother's like, "Are you crazy? We've got the last name, give him the first name." And I thank my brother today for that because it's opened a lot of doors. It's disappointed some people because they thought they were really meeting Pete Rose and then they met me. But yeah, I could have been Wesley Rose.
No, Pete is much better. And I have to clarify this. Are you Peter Rose and you go by Pete Rose, or has it always been Pete Rose?
No. My certificate says Peter Rose, but I've always been called Pete.
Did you grow up a Reds fan?
Honestly, in New York, no. I did appreciate them. Great teams back then, but no, I was actually more of a Mets fan growing up. And then I didn't want to lose allegiance, but things happened. I was on Long Island. I moved into Manhattan and then ended up going to more games in the Bronx. So I can't say I have a favorite New York team now, which probably puts me at odds with most of the 9 million people that live here. But I just love baseball, so I'll go with either team.
All right. Have you ever met Pete Rose?
No, I have not. And I'm obviously admitting this on a podcast, and if I can go back in time, I would not have done it. But when I was probably like 10 years old, we're out in the schoolyard, and kids are like, "Oh, here's a Pete Rose card. Can you sign it for me?" And I said, "Sure." So little did I know I was doing something I shouldn't do until my brother's like, "You got to stop doing that." So for all those that might think they have an original, I'm really sorry.
That's hilarious. And I'm already thinking about a side hustle right now, even though poor Pete has passed us, I think we can still get a few signatures.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll put him in the hall. We'll see.
That's a different discussion.
Yep.
So you're the Director of Stakeholder Relations at Hydro-Quebec US. How long have you been in that role for?
I think I'm coming up on 5 years.
Okay.
So I've been with the larger Quebec family for a good 12 years. I was with the Quebec government office in Washington, D.C., and then in New York, off and on for the last 12 years.
And obviously back then, when you were with the Quebec government, you knew of Hydro-Quebec, you had relationships with the company. How did that transition go from you being, first of all, what were you doing for the government of Quebec? And then how did you transition from Quebec government to Hydro-Quebec, the utility?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. It's an interesting kind of circuitous route that I took. As most New Yorkers, I knew Quebec existed. I knew Montreal was there. I knew a Quebec City, but didn't know much about it, but the Chateau of Frontenac. I ended up leaving right after high school to go to school in France. I made this decision to jump over the pond. And so I learned a language thinking, I'm never going to use it professionally. Fast forward, I was getting my master's degree. And one of my teachers, and I'll talk about this later because this is really how I got inspired to get into this field. She said, Quebec's got this office, a government office in New York City. They have a program. They send 10 Americans up to Quebec for a week. You speak the language. You're in my class. Why don't you go? And so I was just fortunate to go up there and discover Quebec and what it had to offer. And when I came back, I was lucky enough that they had a position that they were advertising for in DC before I was married. So I could more freely move around. And I said, why not? I'll jump 2 feet right into this. And I went down to DC. And so it just kind of started then when I was down there, because, the government of Quebec is the main shareholder of Hydro-Quebec. Hydro-Quebec is a fully integrated utility, and its shareholder is the government, though it operates as a commercial entity. Meaning, at the end of the year, a good amount of the profits are kicked back to the government, which are then used in programs that the government administers throughout the province. So when I was down there, obviously, I learned really quickly about what Hydro-Quebec was, and that was it's the largest renewable energy producer in North America. That Quebec is 2.5 times the size of Texas, which if you can, people that have been in Texas know how big it is. So it's 2.5 times the size of that, with only 8 million people. They all live near the U.S. border, and Quebec has about a quarter of Canada's water, so lakes and rivers. And then I was like, oh wow. And they said, yeah, well, oh wow. In about the 60s, we decided, are we going to go nuclear energy, or are we going to use? And they said, well, once we have this, abundant resource, we should put it to good use. And so that's where they got into producing hydroelectricity, and mainly for the Quebec market. But then any surpluses would go out into the other markets, so including New York, for example.
So, so you were with the Quebec government. What was the driving force for you to either apply or get recruited, or what were the circumstances that brought you from Quebec government to Hydro-Quebec?
Because there was such a close connection between the government and Hydro-Quebec and energy issues, I was always exposed to it in the government relations role that I had. And then when I was in DC, I want to say this is maybe 2011, 2012-ish, somebody came in and said, hey, Pete, there's this project called the Champlain Hudson Power Express. And I said, oh, yeah, cool. This is great. Let's take a look at it. And it was this innovative idea to connect this massive amount of hydroelectricity in Quebec with the city of New York. I said, how are they going to do that? That's like crazy long. And I said, yeah, no, it's like 340 miles long. And so they said, no, this company called TDI, they're proposing to bury a transmission line through the state of New York. But so why DC if it's New York? You need a presidential permit because it's crossing international border. So that's where I first got in, because it was a long permitting process for this project. So that's where I got my first taste of this project, and then Hydro-Quebec's involvement with it. And as we fast forwarded to 2020, 2020, we were on the cusp of, the state had passed a climate law in 2019. And New York City had passed a series of laws, one being Local Law 97, to significantly reduce emissions from the buildings. Which, as you know, there's 1 million buildings in New York. That's the primary source of emissions. But there's literally no utility-size renewable energy available to New York City. So you're upwards over 90% of New York City is powered by burning stuff, mostly oil and gas. So the city said, well, we need access to clean, reliable, existing renewable energy, because you have to build out New York State, and I'm going a little further, just stop me, but like New York State around that time maybe had 20% clean energy through the entire state, the majority of it being up north. And so how are you going to inject more power and meet these goals under the climate law if you were not being able to deliver large amounts of clean energy into New York City? So then the state embarked on, different programs to incentivize different technologies. What was great about access to hydro is it was already existing hydro. So it was a program. How can you actually get that to New York City? And that's through something that's not very sexy, but it's necessary for decarbonizing, is transmission. And so that's where that all fit in. And so that's when I made the transition over to Hydro-Quebec.
I'm not gonna stand by and let you unsexify transmission. All right, how dare you? It's very sexy.
I think that when you're up close and personal with it, it's phenomenal. Just these small little cables on this line that's 340 miles.
Yeah.
When you take a cross section of this transmission line, it is ostensibly the width of my hand. It's about only 5-6 inches wide, and it's just solid copper. You have these like huge images in your mind of like these massive structures and at the end of the day, they're not that. we're burying them, so you're not seeing them. They're not in your face. And environmentally, we went through every possible process, check under the hood, recheck under the hood, agency from a state and federal perspective. This probably is the most studied energy infrastructure project in the state of New York in its history.
And Hydro-Quebec, in terms of, can you give me just a 90-second or 30, 60 to 90-second kind of just overview? I know it's, as you mentioned, it's the largest renewable energy provider in North America, but it doesn't only provide energy to Canada and to that region. It's got its kind of fingers in a bunch of different pockets, correct?
So it is integrated. So we have the production side, we have the transportation or transmission side, and distribution. So it does it all, right? It produces and it gets it to your home or your business. It's, there's 37,000 megawatts of installed capacity today. That's in Quebec Hydro.
Wow.
And now we're embarking on bringing on more wind resources, acquiring other resources. So there was a recent agreement that was signed between Quebec, Newfoundland, and Labrador for more resources. So Hydro-Quebec has massive clean energy resources. The grid, because you need a little bit of renewables on the grid for real emergency reasons, but 99 point, I want to say sometimes 8% of the grid in Quebec is clean energy, which is phenomenal. So when you're looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, most jurisdictions are like, we got to cut our energy emissions. Quebec's already okay there. Clearly, they're 100% almost clean. Cutting emissions is not for this show, but cutting emissions in Quebec is really about transportation, industrial processes.
Got it.
And that's what the province is trying to do now.
Okay.
So how do you do that? Very difficult. Electrify transportation is one thing, but how do you electrify, steel and aluminum smelters and things like that? So that's what they're embarking on, that last mile to become, by 2050, they're really trying to get down to that, net zero carbon goal. That last mile is really difficult to do.
I think, companies like Hydro-Quebec and others that are embarking in these kind of really big renewable energy endeavors are so key to the net zero equation. So I'm glad that we have people like you in there, and that the company is doing its part to not just keep things in Canada, but recognizing that this is a global issue that we all need to kind of get our hands around. I'm going to pivot briefly, Pete, to your role. Director of Stakeholder Relations. That's this weird amorphous title. I don't know what you do. I mean, I do have an idea of what you do, but every time I see you're out at an event, you're greeting hands, you're kissing babies, you're running 5Ks. It sounds like you're having a blast out there. But what is it that a Director of Stakeholder Relations does for a company like Hydro-Quebec?
Yeah, I am having a blast because I love what I do. You have in the energy industry, you've got a lot of different jobs. I know we'll talk about that. You have your engineers, you have your finance guys and girls, you got everybody, right? At the end of the day, what I do is do traditionally public affairs, government relations, relationships with NGOs, sometimes with my colleagues, we work with the media. So it's the front-facing, boots on the ground, and we've found that to develop something of this size, the Champlain Hudson, and to keep up what we're doing in Quebec, you have to know your community. You have to understand what the community wants. You have to have, and I'll take these token words of like social license and acceptability. They're not just terms; they're real. You can stop projects. You can get caught up in campaigns of disinformation, and ultimately, it'll be a disservice to everyone if you're not spending the time understanding what people want and giving them the information that they deserve and that they need. So that I spend a lot of time doing that. And in this project, I like to think that it was an important part of the success of getting the Champlain Hudson Power Express, because the economics, they worked. The need was there. It was clearly established through public policy that this needed to happen. But there's no guarantee that a project of this size gets built unless you take the time with the other members of the team. So I'll give a shout out to, TDI, our construction partner. We all spent a lot of time on the ground, and that's principally what I do.
So you have, you obviously you work for a renewable energy utility provider. Your role is multifaceted and multi-layered with government affairs, probably some PR, policy, and in many ways you have to become an expert in the product that Hydro-Quebec produces and the services that it provides and the overall mission. That requires, a deep knowledge and appreciation of, climate change, energy, markets, etc. Do you have a background in sustainability and energy and climate science? Was that part of your educational or professional training before this role?
Well, I went back to school, so I've talked about this. I started in a completely different field. I was in international development. I was working at the UN for UNICEF, for the people, and I continue to work for the people in a different way now. It's more around environment, and there it was helping children. And so I pivoted when I went to get my master's degree. And the short story on that, because I know you're talking about career opportunities, and maybe there's young people in high school and beginning in college. I was at the UN, and I was thinking, I'm going to make a career there. I went to apply for a job, and the requirement was a master's degree. And I said, "Oh, can't you waive that? I've been working here for a few years." "No, you need a master's." This is back in the day where you had to have that master's degree. So I said, "Okay, I'll take it on the chin, and I'll go get my master's degree." But because of great professors I had, because I didn't stumble, because it was organized, but I found myself in these courses and having these opportunities. I pivoted to this field of clean energy and the environment. So in that coursework, I learned a bunch, but I had training in communications background, political science background. So I came into the job with those fundamentals, but fundamentals that you learn in school. So when you have to get down and do the job, it's what theoretically that you learn. It's a bit of what is your personality and what's your drive, and what are some of these maybe skills. Everybody has different skills that they were somewhat born with or just natural, and then you mix all that stuff up, and voila, you get a result of a person. And so this was just a good fit for me, because you said you have to deeply understand your product or your service or where you are, and yes, that's true. But I would say the majority of my job is actually actively listening. So, and that's something that I guess I was just lucky, because you don't learn it. You're just lucky to just be born with it. I'm interested in people, interested in perspectives, not closed off, not just thinking about what I can say next or what my service or product provides, but like, how does it fit and how can we get to a yes on things? And that's a big part of my job.
When you were in in high school and then eventually you're moving through college, what did you think how did you envision your career turning out? What were you thinking at that time in terms of, this is what I'm really interested in? Did you have any awareness then?
I always tell this story because I have a twin sister, and we were in second grade, and the teacher said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I think I said I want to be an astronaut or something, like that's the kind. I wanted to be every different. My sister said, "I want to be a second grade school teacher." Well, we're 46 now, and guess what she is? A second grade school teacher. I took the very circuitous path because I didn't have that defined kind of end goal in mind. And so I went with what interests me and where I felt like I was bringing value and contributing. And that's how I got to where I was.
Maybe we'll put you on the next flight with Katy Perry, and you can go. Go so, and this is the theme of this podcast, is that no career is set in stone. Right. And people evolve, and you're a great example of that. You had been working in many ways at a job with an organization like the UN that many people, as several UN lifers, I'm sure, or people that have been there for decades. And you, through the encouragement of some of these professors and some of the interests I got you in some of the courses, it ignited something in you. It sparked an interest in you, and you decided to lean into that as opposed to maybe going back to kind of a safe route. Was there ever a point in your in that transitional career that you thought to yourself, "This isn't right for me," or I should, having self doubt about making that step into entering into renewable energy or clean tech, or however you want to classify what it is that you're doing? Did you have a Was there a moment that you were doubting yourself?
No, I go with my gut, and clearly I eat a lot, so I go with my gut a lot. But no, I'm that kind of person. Like if I feel it, I go for it. I mean, I'm not going to say it's always been easy. There's challenges with any career, and we could, all of us, anybody listening to this can talk about like there's never like 100% perfect career. There's been challenges, but to your point, lean into some of those challenges. Like, and I think I like that challenge when I know at the end of the day what we're trying to get to fits with my values. And so this industry fits with my values. So I was always comfortable with it.
I love it. Pivoting to this other similar topic, you and I are through Hydro-Quebec and TDI and the Champlain Hudson Power Express project. A big part of that project was the $40 million Green Economy Fund, which is a 20-year fund where every year up to $2 million are allocated to grant applicants who are focused on workforce development and career training in the green trades and green careers. And I'm very honored to be part of that advisory board with some of my other colleagues that are not from Holland Knight, but other colleagues. I call them as colleagues as part of that board. So you're looking behind the hood a lot of the green careers and sustainability careers tracks. What are some trends that you're seeing in the market with respect to opportunities both for young people who are either in college or right out of college or even in high school that are thinking about green careers? And then what are some trends that you're maybe seeing for experienced individuals who want to break into the space?
No, thanks for the and we're really lucky that you're part of this, Jose. With all honesty, I mean, when we looked at putting this fund together with our partner TDI, we said this fund needs to be very meaningful. That's why it's a 20-year fund. It needs to disperse, each year money so things are sustainable. But we're not experts in this area. We're lucky we do have a colleague now who's a workforce expert that's running the fund. But when we started it, we said, well, we need sounding boards. We need an advisory board. We need somebody to vet these things. And so we spent a lot of time, and I was very fortunate to find you, is we need to know people in the environmental justice movement, in workforce training and development. And so we wanted to put together this board of experts. And I think so far we're very happy. I'm very happy with the way it's working out because we've done several rounds of these, before we've electrified this project, Champlain Hudson, which, real quick, that's going to be electrified in May of 2026. So it's like tomorrow, and it's going to deliver 20% of New York City's power. That's like 1 in 5 light bulbs. If you're standing in Long Island City looking at that beautiful skyline in Manhattan and you say, whoa, that's all coming from clean hydropower. It's significant and has all the benefits that we've talked about. So why workforce training? Workforce training is because it's not for this project. This project's done in a little bit. And it happened so fast. We weren't like spending this money just to, and I don't want to say this is the wrong thing to do, but we took a longer view. We weren't like, let's spend a lot of money real quick, train a bunch of people, put it on the job that we have now, because it was moving so fast. We said, well, if we're really going to reach all these goals that I talked about earlier, about getting eventually to 100% clean sources of power for the state of New York, there's going to be lots of projects like this one that need to get built. And so how do we support that? And we purposely didn't just focus on, use the word trades. Yes, these are big, huge construction projects. So ours has every different trade possible. You've got your operators, you've got your electricians on this job, you've got your divers on this job, you've got the carpenters, you've got everybody on this job, right? But this job is not just an inanimate object that's being built. So the green economy is people like you and me, public affairs, stakeholder relations guy for green. That is a job in our definition in the green economy. An environmental justice leader is a job. An environmental lawyer is a job. So we weren't prescriptive on that. All we said is this fund needs to fund training for people living in disadvantaged frontline communities. And this fund, as you know, the weighing of the points for the submissions is heavily for organizations that can prove not only are we training and giving you that really nice certificate you want to frame and put on your wall, but is this training organization, do they have clear pathways to careers? And so far I've been very happy, and I don't want to say surprised. I've been very happy with the winners so far of these RFPs, because they've shown that they're able to place people into jobs. And that's what counts at the end of the day. You want a career. This is an economy that, is billions and billions of dollars worth of services and trade. There's opportunities to pull people out of frontline communities that have lived in cycles of poverty, potentially for generations, and move yourself into a completely different stratosphere. And so we love to see that, and that's why I'm so proud of this.
Well, you and I have, we've discussed this a few times, and, in many ways, the approach that you and TDI took with this fund, I know that it was part of the process of kind of getting your New York State authorizations to proceed. But in many ways, it really is a great model that I think more companies that are doing large infrastructure projects, and frankly, it doesn't even have to be, economy shifting infrastructure projects. You could just be a developer that's doing something significant in the community, and taking your model of a multi-year program that incentivizes and encourages people from underserved communities to uplift themselves, and through the help of these grants and workforce training programs and other things. I mean, I really do hope that it becomes something that's just part of the default conversation when new projects are developed. I'm actually working on something now, without going too much into it, but I was approached recently about a potential project in a Caribbean island, and the developer wants to build something there. He wants to build a resort, but the first thing he came to us with was, I want to make sure that we're sourcing local materials, and I want to make sure that we are off the grid. So I want to develop our own, our own power for this facility. And then three, which really impacted me, which makes me want to help even more so on this project. He goes, workforce development and local training of people is a non-negotiable. We have to do that. So I think it's whether you I don't know if you guys have been leading the way, but I think the magnitude of your project, and to do it to show that it can be done at a large scale, I think will incentivize more organizations and companies to follow suit. So I can keep pandering to you on that front, but what I wanted to ask you was for people that are looking to break into sustainability. You have this there's this notion that people need to have a science background, or people need to have an environmental background, or people need to have a sustainability background, or people need to have lived on a farm, or people need to get into this space. And I want you to just very quickly distill, break down that myth. Like, why is it so important for people that if they're passionate about something, to just go do it regardless of what your background is?
Yeah, because everything you just mentioned is a green job. So if you don't fit into one, you're going to fit into the other. Let's put it that way. I mean, you should not let that hold you back. I think students often, and unfortunately, are like, oh, my resume doesn't have this. I don't have this. That's not how the world works. That is not how the world, that once you get out there, if you can prove that you're a good team player, and you can start learning, and you can do the basic fundamentals, and this is the key, and this is why I do a lot of mentoring as well, like show up on time, answer the call, write back in the email. Like, you can learn, most people can learn most things right? And so don't be daunted. The whole green energy economy is not, again, around inanimate objects of engineering feats. You need a village. You need everybody to do this. So once I have these conversations with students, it kind of releases their stress, because they walk up to me and they're like, "Well, what does need to be on my resume to work for Hydro-Quebec or whatever?" I was like, "I don't know. Let's take a look. You probably already have it, or at least we can guide you towards what you need to do." And then they're like, "Oh, wait, yeah, to your point, I don't need to be an engineer, a mathematician, a scientist, or any of these things." So I mean, it sounds kind of maybe hokey, but it's true. It's how it works. Certain things. We went back to Katy Perry. If you want to be a NASA scientist, or and you know what, you want to go and be an astronaut, yes, you have to have a certain background, but don't let what you think might be your shortcomings or areas that you're not really an expert in hold you back from getting into a career that, again, aligns with your values and what you want to do.
So you mentioned something earlier in this discussion about, when you were in that pivotal point, and I asked you about, if you had any doubts, and you mentioned that you really didn't, because you leaned into, your feelings, and in many ways, that's another way of saying intuition. And you had something within you. It's hard to describe, that just kind of showed you that a path. And even though you maybe couldn't see the exact A to B to C, we're going to get to where you were, you at least had a feeling, an intuition, some sort of indescribable insight that guided you. And that's something that I bring up a lot with young people who are looking to get into this space, and people that are trying to pivot into this space. Environmental sustainability, it's not for everyone. It's not. Some people are driven by other causes, other issues. Some people are driven purely by the sheer excitement of starting a business and making and generating revenue. Some people are driven by labor and employment issues. Obviously tax attorneys. I don't know what drives them. I can't even understand tax. I don't even try to pretend tax. I pay my taxes. That's about the extent of what I know with taxes. But if you have something that's within you, that is it's growing in you, it's festering in you, and it feels right to be in this space, whether it's working for a nonprofit, a government agency, a company, but you just feel this drive to want to help the environment, to help the planet, you have to exercise. That's nature trying to express itself through you and bring your career and your trade in alignment with what your desire is. And so people have to lean into that intuition a little more, as opposed to being so caught up in our heads and being rational. Because once you start thinking too much, the only thing that comes from it is doubt.
I mean, listen, planning's important in life, right? I mean, you got to have a plan. We know about motivation. If you're trying to lose weight or you're trying to do this, you have to be able to measure it. But to your point, if you've got that fire in your belly, the only thing holding you back is you. Because I mean, we're lucky enough. I'm not speaking if you're born in the middle of a place where there's no other people, but if you're living in this metro area of New York, and I'm guessing most people listening to this live in this area, I mean, this is a densely populated place with lots of different type of people. All you got to do is get out of your own way in your own head and take that leap of faith and say, yeah, I might be nervous, but let me contact that person. And we have so many tools for that now. Like the amount of times that I meet high school kids and they're like, I don't know how to contact somebody. I'm like, there's a thing called LinkedIn. And because it's not TikTok or Instagram or whatever, like, I don't know that. I'm like that, but yes, you can have fun with those, but this is a tool. This is a tool to go out there and you can start being like, I don't say hiding, but you can start from a shy place behind your keyboard and connect with somebody. And then guess what? You can connect with them in person. And then you build, like, the only way this society continues to progress. And yeah, we've made it processes and all these things, is human interaction. You need to. We went through this whole how do we communicate when we couldn't see each other? We're back now. Bring it back. Bring it back. We need it. And so once you get past that fear factor and you say, I'm going to put myself out, I might feel ridiculed or no, I mean, we're all, and people usually like to help other people. I mean, 9 out of 10 times when you meet somebody, if If you ask them for help, they're probably going to help you or try to help you. Everybody's been in that position. So go for it.
I agree 100%. Something that I use, I've started saying with a little more frequency lately is, life is a contact sport, and yes, so many great benefits of being behind the keyboard and connecting with. You can do a lot of, sliding into people's DMs and hoping they get back to you, and you can look at people's profiles. And I think there is a place for that, for, studying people that you admire and looking and following their careers and maybe modeling your careers after theirs, if you find someone that's really inspiring. But I don't know, man. You got to be out in the wild. You got to be out with people. And there are some people that are shy. I get it. And social anxiety is a thing. I get it. But at some point, to really make an impact out there, you kind of have to just be speaking with people and connecting with individuals on a very personal basis. Um, it's something that I ask all of my guests, Pete. I'm gonna ask you. It's a two-part question, but the first one is, if you were sitting with somebody who is a young person, imagine it's a niece or a nephew or a best friend's child, and they looked you up and said, and they're interested in environmental sustainability, climate, and they say, Pete, can I get some advice as to how I should conduct myself in college, or high school, like to break into this space? What advice would you give that person?
It's a good question. It's going to be very basic at the beginning, and I fully believe in this. Like, half of success comes from just showing up. So show up, right? And what we just said before, apply yourself, do the right thing, and take those chances, those leaps of faith. Like, once you get into your coursework and you have the opportunity to take some of these courses, take it, even if it feels a little daunting. It might be more science based, or maybe you have a science brain and you're not really into the more humanities side of it and the history side of it, but just embrace it all. Take it all. You'll find your place in it, because again, we talked about this is an economy. It's not one sector, it's an economy. You'll find your place. And then when you're a student, this is the beauty of being a student, is you can do things like internships. You can talk to your professors and say, I'd like to do these practicum or these capstone things. I'm doing one right now with a graduate student from NYU. It's wildly fulfilling for me, because it brings me back to when I was a student. But I'm hoping for this particular student, it's giving them like this access to major project, major company, without the risks of having to, there's not, don't have to, like, if I don't perform well, I'm not getting fired. Like, you really, get this opportunity. So seize it, because you're not going to get it again. That's the other thing. It's not going to miraculously come up later in life. So seize it. And again, I think people are in academia because they want to teach people and help them. People in careers, it's another thing. Instinctively, I think it's humans. We want to see our species continue. So we want to give back when you get to a certain point. This is a field where you've got, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There's money in this. So you might say, if I'm not into that type A super competitive thing, maybe I don't want to get into the financing side of these things, but maybe you do. You don't know. If you're like, I really want to do this community work and do the EJ work. Yes, you have fighters. Thank God you have fighters in those areas. But you have some people in there, their personality types are a little bit more, I'm not fighting the next guy for a bonus. I'm in there. The bonus is if we can lift all boats. So you can find your space based on your personality type, but you got to seize the opportunities and show up.
You mentioned two things. One, first of all, 100% agree on showing up. That's almost like the basic minimum, because if you're not showing up, then you're not. What are we doing? You're not demonstrating that you're reliable. You're demonstrating the opposite of that. Two, you mentioned something and you didn't identify it as this, but I'm going to articulate a little bit. There has to be a level of self-awareness that I think a lot of people do not tap into early in their careers. And it happens for a lot of people sometimes around their 30s or 40s. Maybe they're going through a midlife crisis and they felt like they haven't been in their calling for a long time. And then they do that kind of introspective look of what they've been up to. There is nothing stopping a 20-year-old or an 18-year-old from spending a little bit of time figuring out what they like and what they don't like with the experiences they've had to date. Because to go through a whole career or your whole life without doing that homework of looking within yourself a little bit, you're really doing your soul a disservice. You have to. I learned at a very early age that I did not enjoy fundraising. I worked for an elected official up in Albany, and I saw
Mhm.
that a lot of the time that we spent in meetings was him asking for money. I did not enjoy that.
Mhm.
There were some counterparts that I worked with that really loved that part of, the work. I knew after that internship that I did up in Albany, I was like, I will not. This is not for me. There may
Mhm.
be other parts of what we do here. The policy stuff was interesting. Meeting with constituents was interesting. The fundraising, not for me. I don't think I would make a good elected official for that. I would be. I
But
might.
imagine you didn't do the internship though. It goes back to what you were saying before. What if you just, stayed in your little bubble and nothing people do that for lots of reasons. You mentioned maybe anxiety, but that's a whole other topic for a different podcast. But I think everybody can help everybody when it comes to mental health issues. And I just challenged somebody to the ice bucket challenge because it's back. I don't know if you remember that for the ALS, but it's back because it's real. Everybody's going through something. So, but we're there to help each other. But imagine you didn't do that, and you would have just say theoretical, and then you would have applied for a job, and you would have applied for a job where you had to be a fundraiser, and on paper you fit that, and they hired you, and they said, Jose, show up, and then you're into it, and you're like, oh man, this is a real job now, and if I leave it, I'm not getting paid anymore. Maybe you had a family by then, who knows? So taking advantage of these early experiences where you can discover who you are and what you like and what you don't like is critically important. And the internship things, I see less and less of those now, and that worries me with this generation. I
Mm,
see less and less like high school internships. I see
mm,
people going into school trying to get that first job, but never had that internship opportunity to make the mistakes, to learn the essentials, to learn the basics. And that's why I do a lot of mentoring, because I'm like, we have to bring this back, not just because I'm thinking about myself. I was lucky. I worked with a lot of people when I was younger that had their own businesses. So they could afford to say, Pete, you're 14, 15 years old, jump on the truck with me and go. But I had to get up at 7 in the morning. I had to go do it. I got a small little, pay at the end of the day, but I had to manage that. We're not doing that for kids these days, and that's a disservice.
I think one of the greatest things that the school that I went to high school in Manhattan. It's called High School for the Environmental Studies on 57th Street, 56th Street, and on like 9th Avenue. And I don't think they forced us because you really can't force people. But one of the requirements was once you hit 10th grade, you had to do an internship.
It's good.
It was almost like a condition to your graduation. You needed a certificate. So a bunch of my friends and I who lived in Washington Heights, we were like, well, we don't want to work at the Red Cross. We didn't want to work at this accounting firm. We saw a listing for the aquarium in Brooklyn. Now, I don't know
Nice.
if you've ever taken the train from Washington Heights to the aquarium in Brooklyn, but it's like a 2-hour ride. And
I've
we
had
would
it.
get up at 6:30, meet up at 7 o'clock at 181st on the A train. And it was three of us. And then we'd meet up with our friend Chrissy at 59th Street. And the four of us would every other Saturday would take this train out to Coney Island. And it was, for me, it was such a fantastic experience because I got real world experience. I got to work in conservation, which was a kind of a foreign concept. I got to learn about animals, interact with the public from all over the world. And so, to your point, I mean, that little bit combined with the following summer internship that I did at the Nature Conservancy, which you and I have spoken at length, those two experiences really sparked my interest and have in many ways made me um, interested in and exposed me to environmental issues. I would be a completely different person, I think, if I didn't have those early, transformative 15, 16-year-old experiences. So to your point, that's the thing that all schools really should be pushing for is getting those, because you can learn stuff in the classroom, and you've done plenty of, you have a master's, you've done plenty of schooling. You forget stuff as quickly as you learn it.
Yeah,
And
my 11-year-old is asking me about algebra, and she's like, "Do you use that in your job?" And I'm like, "No, but I might if I would have chose a different career path. But no, I don't use it. Nobody uses it unless you're in the sciences,
yeah,
But you have to learn it as a base. It's important to do that. And to
Yeah.
your thing, like, I don't know if it was you and your buddies that motivated each other to go down to Brooklyn every day. But if you don't have that self motivation or your group of buddies, I go back to having mentors. Look for a mentor. It's so key to keep you, focused and answer those questions because the person's been through it before. Like, find that person you trust to be your mentor.
I did I did a podcast interview a few weeks ago with Marissa Blackshire of Bloom Energy, and the whole episode was really the larger discussion on mentors and mentorship. So you're spot on there. I want to pivot very very quickly to a similar question, but somebody who's been working at a career that's not green or not sustainability related, but they've got some skill sets that they've worked. Maybe they've worked in fundraising. Maybe they've been a teacher. Maybe they've been accounting. Maybe they've been in PR. Who knows? But something happened. They watched the movie. They listened to a podcast. Maybe they read a book that really sparked their interest in climate change and trying to make the world a better place. What advice would you give that person who's trying to break into this space?
I would say a lot of skills are transferable. And if you find that you want to do something and you've looked at it and you said, well, my skills up until now are not transferable to what I want, there's always continuing education. I mean, that's kind of what I did when I was working at the UN. I went to school at night. You go back to school, figure it out. Like, there are tools out there if you really are dedicated to doing it. So again, it's a simple message. Just if you feel it, seize it, do it, and if you're lucky, you have that transferable skill and you can go from, if you have teaching skills and this patience and able to communicate, you could probably move that over into something similar to what I'm doing, without much formal training. You kind of learn a lot of it. Like, I got into energy. Yeah, I had the foundation, theoretical foundation, but did I really know how megawatt hours and terawatt hours and this worked and advanced conductoring? No, you learn it as you go. And so a lot of life is that give yourself some slack too. You're not going to know everything on day one.
And you mentioned something super important, that wishing that you're going to end up in the career that you want is not going to cut it. You can wish all you want and you can sit behind LinkedIn and comment all you want. You have to take action. You have to do stuff. So to your point, you recognize that you needed to go back to school. So that was it for you. For some people, going back to school perhaps may not be an option, but there are resources where they can bridge the gap to education. It doesn't necessarily have to be a formal, degree or formal master's or PhD. There are ways to do it. So you're 100% right.
Well, and to that point, I just want to interject. Like, when you and I were growing up, and it was even in popular culture, it's like, oh, well, if you went to this school and you need to go to this best, an Ivy League school to get this job. I don't know. I see these days it's less about, yeah, I'm sure there's some industries and it's a little more how it was in the past, but I don't think there's much of an emphasis on like exactly what academic institution you graduated from. It's more like how well-rounded is that person, or even how unique what their experiences are, and less about did I go to that specific school.
You're right on with that. I think there's been a trend moving away from kind of purely, in the academic sense at least, name schools and looking at resumes and people kind of a little more holistically. I'll ask you two more questions, but one is, are there any resources that you would recommend to individuals out there who are looking to learn more about, getting into this space, or just generally to beef up on some of these topics that we're speaking about, whether it's, books, podcasts, movies, websites? Is any potential resources that you might point some people to that you think would be helpful?
Sure. I mean, if you're in New York State and you're interested in this, I would go to NYSERDA's website. So NYSERDA is our state agency for energy and research. They have a plethora of information about the industry, reports every year about numbers of green jobs. What are the green jobs? So if you really want to say, I want to better understand, I know Pete's told me that it's pretty much everything, and thanks for saying that, Pete. But really, what is it? Believe me, you'll understand why I said what I said. You go into that, and that's a good resource. Your Cornell University has a really good program in Manhattan now around that as well. So look up, Cornell. On a day to day, I'm a big, love journalism. I think it's important. There's many journalists that I follow, but I'm like a primary source guy. Like if I want to, especially for energy, I want to know what are the market prices right now in New York. I'm going to go to the New York Independent Systems Operator website, and it's important to do that if you want to get into energy, because you're going to look and you're going to get there like, this is a dashboard with all these graphs or whatever. I'm afraid of them. After a while, it's okay, because guess what? NISO's got a really good website with a good blog that explains everything. So go, if you like energy, electricity in New York State, go to NISO's website. And I'm praying that they don't fall victim to losing funds, but go to the Energy Information Administration's website as well. Some really good reports. If you want to understand the macro trends, if you want to understand more, technology sector specific trends, go to that. That's kind of, and then, yeah, I mean, I'm in the industry a lot, so that's kind of like how I learned. But if you want to get a taste of it, I would recommend those.
Those are great. Those are great.
Yeah, and then from a political perspective, of just kind of following those newsletters. Axios does a newsletter, Politico does a newsletter. So those are good ones you can follow. A lot of them are free. If you're interested in what are the policies and politics behind this, and you wanted to just understand what's going on, read a few of those newsletters, and you'll be up to speed.
And in doing that, it might spark an idea for a role or an organization or a company that you then perhaps, not you specifically, but whoever's listening here, may want to then pursue for potential opportunities. You may see in a report that X company is doing this or Y organization is doing that. And then next thing you know, you go on LinkedIn, you look them up, and lo and behold, you see that they have a job opening that perhaps fits, maybe you don't fit exactly one-to-one, but you have enough skill sets that you may throw your name in the hat, or maybe you reach out to somebody like Pete or Jose and say, hey, thank you guys for being on this podcast. And I saw that on LinkedIn, you're connected to so-and-so. Would you mind chatting with me for a few minutes? And then perhaps I want to explore possibly being connected with them. I'm all about that. I'm all about those warm leads. And I just gave someone an idea as to how to go and find their
first. And I take it one step forward. We've talked about kind of, again, behind the keyboard, what you can read. We've got SUNY, CUNY, my alma mater, NYU, Columbia, Fordham. They do public programming. And you can show up to it, and you can sign up, and you're going to hear speakers. You're going to hear people from the industry. And then do I go and approach them at the end and say, hi, my name is X. I'd like to know more about what you do. That's another really wonderful way to learn.
Pete, are you listening to any podcasts or audiobooks right now?
I'm not. I will take any recommendations. I just moderated a roundtable down in DC, and my icebreaker was, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite TV show? So those are kind of like what I'm into. But yeah, I'd like to, and maybe you'll give them, when we're done with this, some recommendations on podcasts.
I will. What'd you say for your favorite movie and favorite TV show? I'm assuming if you asked a question, you at least had to answer it.
Yeah. I also I'll go back to real quick and then cut me off when you want. I'm a huge movie guy. I started, my first job was in the movie industry. I kind of pretty much did everything. When I came out of school, I said, oh, I'd like to know how to movies made. So I worked on a movie called Lord of War in the production side of it. And then I said, how did these movies get picked and I said, oh, wow, Tribeca Film Festival. So I worked at the film festival. Then I said, well, how do they get into the actual theaters and what happens? So then I worked for a distribution company. And That's where I learned your lesson. So I went to the distribution company. I was working on these great indie movies. It was about getting the trailers cut and putting the posters in there and knowing where they were going to be shown. But then when it got to counting box office receipts, that's where I lost it. And I left that job, and this is why I'm telling the job, because I recognized that I wasn't driven by how much money that movie made that weekend. It was more about the movie experience. So I got out of it, So my answer, I love comedy. I think it's important. Everybody has their different types of comedy that they like. Saturday Night Live has been, for me, a really important thing I can count on every week. It's connected to me with a lot of friends. It's very quotable. It's fun. So it's something that's kind of sustained me and kept me really happy over all these years.
Yeah.
And then I have a bunch of movies, but I have a particular movie because then it linked me with a friend. Night at the Roxbury.
Yes.
Which was a spinoff from SNL, but one of my best friends to this day, we saw that movie together. And like anything going, and I'm talking, I met this guy over 30 years ago. Anytime we're together, that movie comes back up. We put it on. It's quotable. It's just hilarious. And so, it doesn't show that I'm very sophisticated, but that's a movie I really, really like and can watch over and over.
So I can't listen to that song without thinking of Chris Kattan and Will Ferrell.
Without doing this with your head?
I cannot. I can't hear What Is Love without visually seeing Chris Kattan almost giving himself a neck injury. and he was in many ways one of the best. I mean, SNL has had obviously so many great cast members coming through the years. He was one of my favorites. Oh my gosh, there was a skit that he did where he played that little half man, half monkey, and then The Rock.
Yeah.
The Rock was like the bigger version of him. Yeah. Oh my God. I could watch Chris Kattan almost every day.
Well, here's the funny thing. When I see you in person, so my friend, again, one of my dearest friends, for my birthday, he finds these crazy things. And so all of a sudden I get a text message with Chris Kattan in it, in the video. And I'm like, what is this? And I click on it, and it's him telling me happy birthday and quoting lines from that movie. Now, I guess that's a thing now. You can pay old actors to do stuff.
Cameo.
Yeah. I got one of those. I'm like, this is amazing.
That's awesome. Pete, I could literally, and we've done this many times, but I feel like every time that you and I get together, I feel like our conversations are always cut short because you and I can speak forever. So I'm not going to do that. This is now literally by far the longest podcast episode. And I think we've covered a lot of really important things. So I'm happy that we got to do this. I'm going to ask you one final question, or not final questions, but do you have any final words of encouragement out there for people who are looking to break into or pivot into this space?
Words of encouragement. Again, I go back to just get out of your own head. Do it. Just do it. And like when somebody offers you a resource, when somebody says, I'm going to say it right now. If you got somebody that writes you in and says, I enjoyed what Pete said. I connected with him. I'd like to learn more. Does he have any time to talk to me? Yeah, give him my email. I'm happy. I'm happy to do it because somebody did it for me. So Ben, take that leap of faith, follow through, show up. And if you really want to do it, just do it.
Pete, thank you so much. You've been so gracious with your time and your advice. People can find Pete Rose on LinkedIn. I'm sure there's other Pete Roses. I'm sure if you type in Pete Rose Hydro, he'll be the first one. Any other ways that people should try to get in touch with you, or LinkedIn should be the best way?
I think LinkedIn's the best because that way they use the tool too, and it's helpful for them to learn how to use it.
Find Pete on LinkedIn, look up Hydro-Quebec. They're doing some amazing things, and look up the Champlain Hudson Power Express project. I'm so honored to be a part of the advisory board for the Green Economy Fund. And flattered that Pete and his people thought of me, and honored to be a friend of Pete. So I'm really just happy that we were able to do this after so many months of talking about it, Pete.
Thank you for the invitation, and I look forward to meeting up with you soon.
Thank you, Pete.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Green Collar Careers Podcast. A huge thank you to our guests for sharing their time and insights with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps more people discover the podcast. You can also support the show by leaving a review or sharing this episode with someone who might find it helpful. And if there's a topic or guest you'd love to hear from, please let me know. DM me, reach out, shoot me an email. Thanks again for being part of this community, and I'll see you again next time.